Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Spider-Man, Brand New Day 2026 Movie Review. Spider-Man, Brand New Day is a 2026 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character Spider-Man. Produced by Columbia Pictures, Marvel Studios, and Pascal Pictures, and distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing, it is the 38th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, and the fourth film in the MCU Spider-Man film series following Spider-Man: No Way Home, 2021. The film was directed by Destin Cretton, written by Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, and stars Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man alongside Zendaya, Sadie Sink, Jacob Batalon, John Bernthal, Florence Pugh, Trammell Tillman, Marissa Tomei, and Mark Ruffalo. In the film, Parker anonymously protects New York City as the hero Spider-Man and investigates a powerful new threat while his superpowers undergo a surprising and potentially dangerous evolution. Sony was developing a fourth MCU Spider-Man film by August 2019, and producer Amy Pascal revealed in November 2021 that it was intended to be the first in a new trilogy starring Holland. Work on the story began that December, with Holland more involved in development than he was for the previous films. McKenna and Summers returned as writers by February 2023, Cretton was hired to direct by October 2024, and the title derived from the 2008 comic book storyline Brand New Day that reset Spider-Man's status quo was announced in March 2025. The producers wanted Holland's Parker to be a proper Spider-Man for the first time, on his own and fighting street-level crime in New York City. Ahead of filming, Bernthal and Ruffalo were revealed to be reprising their MCU roles of Frank Castle / Punisher and Bruce Banner / Hulk. Filming took place from August to December 2025, with location filming in Glasgow, Scotland, and throughout England. Soundstage work occurred at Pinewood Studios in England. Spider-Man: Brand New Day premiered at the Dolby Theatre in Hollywood, Los Angeles, on July 27, 2026, and was released in the United States on July 31 as part of Phase 6 of the MCU. It received largely positive reviews from critics, with some calling it the best and most mature of the MCU Spider-Man films, and praise going to Holland's performance and the more grounded, character-driven story. The film has grossed $1.216 billion worldwide, becoming the second highest grossing Spider-Man film and the highest grossing film of 2026. It had the highest opening weekend gross for the US and Canada and the second highest worldwide. Following Stephen Strange's spell, the world has forgotten that Peter Parker exists. 4 years later, Parker anonymously protects New York City as its celebrated hero Spider-Man, but has distanced himself from those he used to know, including his ex-girlfriend Michelle M.J. Jones-Watson and former best friend Ned Leeds. Parker stops Frank Castle from causing collateral damage in pursuit of a tank, which rampages through the city before breaking into a Department of Damage Control, DODC, building. The driver had been telepathically possessed, and the telepath body hops from person to help Mac Gargan escape. Parker inquires with Yelena Belova, who tells him someone has repeatedly attacked the DODC in search of VMAX. Parker questions DODC Director Bill Metzger, who claims ignorance. Parker encounters Ned and MJ, who have moved back to New York after graduating from MIT and do not remember him. Parker returns home in distress and wakes up the next morning with heightened senses and organic webs emanating from his wrists. He tracks down Gargan, now possessed by the telepath and attacking into the DODC. The telepath mocks Parker, who reacts violently, brutally beating Gargan and inadvertently injuring a responding police officer. Hoping to control his new mutations, Parker goes to Bruce Banner to ask about his inhibitor device that uses Cerna to suppress his superpowered alter ego, the Hulk. On Banner's advice, Parker makes his own inhibitor to limit his powers, while also working on a second to suppress the telepath's abilities. Before Parker can finish, the telepath finds Parker's letter to MJ and Ned explaining Strange's spell, and possesses MJ in an attempt to kill her. Parker rescues MJ, and his cameras identify a nearby teenager as the telepath. Parker takes MJ to Castle's hideout to protect her. Parker completes both inhibitors, and learns the telepath's name, Jean Grey. Jean attacks the DODC again, this time in person and using a possessed banner. His inhibitor is removed in the scuffle, causing him to revert into the Hulk. Castle arrives to assist but is possessed by Jean. Parker calms the Hulk, while Jean has Castle blow open a vault where DODC agents are hiding. Parker places the inhibitor on Jean, who is taken into custody, freeing Castle. Before losing consciousness, Jean mumbles Sarah. Metzger claims that while Jean was possessing him, he was remembering a deceased colleague named Sarah. When Parker returns to Castle's hideout, MJ finds Parker's letter and confronts him. Parker explains and declares his love, but MJ, not remembering Parker, does not reciprocate his feelings. Despite this, she invites him to her and Ned's apartment, where a masked Parker bonds with both of them. After MJ describes not remembering anything while possessed, Parker realizes Metzger lied to him. He contacts Yelena, who learns from redacted DODC files that Sarah is Jean's sister, another telepath who was kidnapped by the DODC. Parker invades the DODC prison to rescue Jean. As Metzger begins experimenting on Jean's mind, she realizes that VMAX is simply the weathered vent max label on the air vent above her holding cell, the last thing Sarah saw before she died. Enraged, Jean creates a sonic field miles around the facility, freezing everyone within in place except for Parker, who is still resistant to her abilities. Jean rebuffs Parker's apologies and possesses the hand ninjas under the DODC's employ. Initially overwhelmed, Parker removes his inhibitor and embraces his new mutations to defeat the hand. Finding Jean, Parker allows her to enter his mind. She sees a memory of his late Aunt May, who accepted his abilities and loved him for himself. Parker and Jean reconcile over their shared understanding of loss. Parker senses a bullet shot by Castle at Jean from a distance and shields her, sustaining a near-fatal wound. Parker wakes up in the hospital with a remorseful Castle, who explains that Jean psychically kept him alive while in critical condition. A guilt-ridden Jean quietly leaves the city, Metzger disappears, and the DODC comes under investigation. Parker vows to no longer need to be alone to be Spider-Man. Seeing Ned again, he reintroduces himself with their old handshake. In a post-credits scene, Ned's Spyday tracker app appears to show Spider-Man located somewhere in outer space. Sony Pictures said in August 2019 that it would not be making future Spider-Man films with Marvel Studios and its president, Kevin Feige, after negotiations to update the production deal between the two companies failed. Sony co-produced Spider-Man: Homecoming, 2017, and Spider-Man: Far From Home, 2019, with Marvel Studios and Amy Pascal, and was reported to be developing 2 more films. Following a negative fan reaction, Sony and Marvel's parent company Disney returned to negotiations and announced a new agreement at the end of September, allowing Marvel Studios and Feige to produce Spider-Man: No Way Home, 2021, with Pascal. In February 2021, Peter Parker/Spider-Man star Tom Holland said No Way Home was the final film in his contract, but he hoped to continue playing the character, and later added that any further Spider-Man films would differ from the previous trilogy and feature a tonal change. Around the release of No Way Home in December 2021, Holland said he was unsure if he should continue making Spider-Man films, feeling he would have done something wrong if he were still portraying the character in his 30s. He was interested in a film being made about Miles Morales/Spider-Man instead, and added that he would be saddened to leave the franchise, but he had achieved what he wanted with the character. Despite these comments, Pascal hoped to continue working with Holland on future Spider-Man films, and said work on the first film in a new trilogy was about to begin. Aaron Couch at The Hollywood Reporter said Sony did not yet have official plans for further MCU Spider-Man films but hoped to continue its collaboration with Marvel Studios. Pascal hoped the partnership between Sony and Disney would last forever, and Feige promised that it would not break down again as it did during No Way Home's development. He said Holland would return in another MCU film and confirmed that Marvel Studios had begun discussing the story for the next Spider-Man film with Pascal, Sony, and Disney. By April 2022, Sony was expecting director John Watts to return from the previous trilogy after he exited as director of Marvel Studios' Fantastic Four film, 2025. Sony Pictures CEO and chairman Tom Rothman hoped the whole group would return, including Watts, Holland, and Zendaya, Holland's then-girlfriend and later wife who portrays Michelle M.J. Jones-Watson. In February 2023, Feige said writers were working on a story with big ideas, but this was put on hold in May because of the 2023 Writers Guild of America strike. Pascal said work would resume after the strike concluded. Holland said he was in meetings about ideas and ambitions for the film, and these were also put on hold due to the strike. 71 He was happy with the creative reasoning for why a fourth film should be made, but was apprehensive about the stigma surrounding fourth films. He felt they hit a home run with the first three films, calling No Way Home the perfect send-off. 73 And part of him wanted to exit the franchise on that high note and pass the baton to another actor. Holland only wanted to return if they could do justice to the character. The writers' strike ended in late September 2023, and Holland confirmed in November that discussions about the film resumed. Since the release of No Way Home, Holland was aware of fan sentiment on the internet for the series' future, and tried to get a really good sense of what it is the people wanted for the next Spider-Man film, with fans interested in a film that was relatable, where Spider-Man was not saving the world but focused on maybe saving himself. He presented this vibe during his meetings with the studios, believing it was important to understand what fans wanted to see since we make these movies for the fans. Holland pitched that Peter should go through puberty-like changes to his powers, an idea that the creative team liked and developed further. Another proposal was to give him a pet dog, which was quickly rejected. Holland was able to have more input on the film's story because he was involved in the creative process much earlier compared to previous MCU Spider-Man films. Journalist Jeff Snyder reported in early 2024 that Marvel Studios was considering Drew Goddard and Justin Lin to direct, that Chris McKenna and Eric Summers had returned from the prior three Spider-Man films to write the script, that Holland and Zendaya were both expected to return, and that filming was set to begin in September or October of that year, delaying filming for the third season of Euphoria, 2026, to accommodate Zendaya's schedule. In April, Holland said they were giving the writers the time that they needed to work on the script following the strike. He added that he would always want to do Spider-Man films and owed his career to the franchise, but reiterated that he wanted to make sure the next film was made the right way to preserve the legacy of the previous trilogy. Feige said in July that a draft of the script was being submitted relatively soon, and Watts might not direct due to his work on other projects. Watts ultimately chose not to direct the film. After further work on the script, the studios began meeting with directors. Destin Daniel Cretton was the top choice to direct by September 2024 when he was in early talks. He directed the film Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, 2021, for Marvel Studios and signed an overall deal with them in December 2021 that included directing a sequel to that film and developing the Disney Plus series Wonder Man, 2026. Cretton was also hired to direct the MCU crossover film Avengers: The Kang Dynasty in July 2022, but stepped down in November 2023 due to schedule delays. At that time, he met with Feige to discuss other work with the studio, and the fourth Spider-Man film was brought up as a possibility. Kang Dynasty was subsequently reworked into Avengers: Doomsday, 2026. The fourth Spider-Man film was said to be the priority for Marvel Studios over a sequel to Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Also in September 2024, McKenna and Summers were confirmed to be writing the film. Holland and Zendaya were reportedly in talks to return, and filming was expected to begin in early 2025. Snyder reported a planned release date in 2026 and questioned the extent of Zendaya's role due to her busy 2025 schedule filming Euphoria and the film Dune, Part 3, 2026. At the time of Cretton's hiring, Holland said the script was going in 100 different directions. Cretton had discussions about the possibilities for the fourth film with Feige and Pascal, both of whom were interested in a more grounded story that focused on some of the issues Peter might be going through during his period of isolation following the events of No Way Home. The idea allowed Cretton to gravitate toward exploring the character as someone who is, by every sense of the word, completely alone. In October 2024, Holland was cast in The Odyssey, 2026, and filming was delayed by 6 months after Holland approached Sony so that he could complete that film first. Cretton said that this delay allowed for more development time, but he would have been able to join and complete the film on its original schedule. Although Holland felt excited after reading a draft of the script with Zendaya, he still felt further work was needed. He said one of the challenges was fitting into the overall plan for the MCU and described the schedule needed for this as a tall order but definitely achievable. 98 He confirmed that filming would now begin in mid-2025. Soon after Holland's comments, he and Cretton were confirmed to have signed on. The film was scheduled for release on July 24, 2026. Justin Kuritzks rewrote the script with Cretton during the additional 6 months of development, after Kuritzks worked with Zendaya on the film Challengers, 2024. Cretton said Kuritzks brought a different perspective to Brand New Day after McKenna and Summers left to go work on Doomsday and Avengers, Secret Wars, 2027, writing some of the most beautiful scenes and continuing to work with Cretton until the film was ready for release. One such scene was the memory Parker has with his Aunt May Parker that he shares with Jean Grey. Despite Kuritzks' contributions, only McKenna and Summers received writing credit on the film. Snyder reported in November 2024 that filming would not begin until late 2025 or early 2026 and there was potential for the release date to be delayed until 2027 as a result, in part because Sony did not plan to release it the same year as the animated film Spider-Man, Beyond the Spider-Verse, which was expected to be ready for a 2026 release. Beyond the Spider-Verse was later scheduled for release in 2027. A month later, Snyder reported that filming would take place from June to October 2025, between the filming of Euphoria's third season and Dune, Part 3, and Zendaya's role had been severely reduced due to this schedule, as well as her role in The Odyssey. He also reported that alien symbiotes were included in the script, a new group of Peter's classmates would be introduced, Sacha Baron Cohen would appear as Mephisto, reprising his role from the series finale of the Disney Plus miniseries Ironheart, 2025, and Charlie Cox would reprise his role as Matt Murdock/Daredevil from No Way Home and other MCU media. Cox denied his involvement in October 2025. In February 2025, filming was confirmed to start in mid-2025 in London, and the release date was pushed back a week to July 31, 2026, to distance it from the release of The Odyssey earlier that month. Sadie Sink was cast as Jean Grey in March. She was offered the role without auditioning, having previously worked with Cretton on the film The Glass Castle, 2017. Her role was kept secret until the film's release, and became the subject of fan speculation, with it widely believed to be Jean. Pascal likened it to the worst kept secret in Hollywood, namely, the appearances of Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker/Spider-Man, from Raimi's Spider-Man film series, and Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker/Spider-Man, from Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man film series, 2012 to 2014, in No Way Home. Pascal and Cretton both said the secrecy ultimately benefited fans by leaving room for surprise. The film's development saw many iterations of its villain character. Feige explained that before settling on Jean, they were using very obscure character nobody had ever heard of in a similar role to Jean that just wasn't satisfying. Holland suggested another character for the role that Marvel Studios could not include in Brand New Day, which led to considering Jean. The creatives realized that she would fit the story of the film, being a young telepath who would have had a similar journey of trauma and loss as Parker, but one who did not have mentor figures or community of support like him. She was chosen because of this and not a mandate to service the larger MCU plans such as the then upcoming untitled X-Men film, with the suggestion of Sync for the role solidifying her inclusion. At Sony's Cinemacon panel at the end of March 2025, Holland and Cretton announced the title as Spider-Man, Brand New Day, derived from the 2008 comic book storyline Brand New Day. Holland said that the title refers not to the film's beginning, but rather to its last frame. He later elaborated that it was a rebirth, something completely new which felt to him like the first movie in the next chapter rather than the fourth installment of a franchise. Cretton also described the film as the beginning of a new chapter for Spider-Man and said it would feature a tonal shift from the previous trilogy. Holland added that Brand New Day would have a more mature tone than past MCU Spider-Man films, which he likened to the experience of a teenager. Feige stated that the intention behind that trilogy was to evoke the first act of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, 2002, in which Maguire's Peter is in high school but at a slower pace, following Holland's Peter year by year through his academic journey until culminating in the conclusion of No Way Home, a moment when the character is very classically Spidey by himself, alone in his apartment listening to a police scanner, going out and being Spider-Man. Liza Colonzais joined the cast in May, as Detective Jean DeWolf. Zendaya and Jacob Batalon were confirmed to be returning in June 2025. Filming was set to begin that August, and Jon Bernthal was revealed to be reprising his MCU role of Frank Castle/Punisher in the film. Holland and Bernthal had previously worked together on the film Pilgrimage, 2017, and helped each other during the casting process for their respective MCU roles. Holland noted that it was a challenge to incorporate an R-rated character like the Punisher in Brand New Day, and stated that the production team worked to ensure that the character's portrayal was authentic to the Frank Castle fans know, including by finding workarounds for his character's profanity and violence. One example is Spider-Man webbing the Punisher's mouth when he tries to swear. Bernthal said it was important to himself, Holland, and Cretton that the film's portrayal feel like the same character that is seen in the Disney Plus television special The Punisher, One Last Kill, 2026. The filmmakers were in constant discussions with the creative team behind the Disney Plus series Daredevil, Born Again, 2025, present, to ensure impacts are felt between the two projects and events line up for their shared characters, which include the Punisher and Sheila Rivera. Brad Winderbaum, the head of Marvel Television, said the tones of each project were different but they still wanted to highlight that they exist in the same world. Following rumors that Mark Ruffalo would be reprising his MCU role as Bruce Banner/Hulk in the film, his casting was confirmed with the start of filming in August 2025. Both Kit and Aaron Couch of The Hollywood Reporter said Ruffalo's role had only firmed up as the script came together in the lead-up to filming. They noted that the previous MCU Spider-Man films each featured a major MCU co-star Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark/Iron Man in Homecoming, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury in Far From Home, and Benedict Cumberbatch as Dr. Stephen Strange in No Way Home as part of Sony and Marvel Studios' special agreement, and compared this to the Marvel team-up comic books which feature Spider-Man teaming up with different heroes. They felt Brand New Day was stacking the deck by featuring both Bernthal and Ruffalo. The latter made a cameo appearance in the mid-credits scene of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings for Cretton. Holland previously expressed interest in an MCU team-up with Spider-Man and the Hulk, enjoying an image from the comics of the pair together and believing they should have a big brother, little brother dynamic. Bringing these two characters together on screen was a long-held dream of Feige's. Also in August, Michael Mondo was set to reprise his role as Mac Gargan/Scorpion from Homecoming, following up on that film's mid-credits scene. Feige said the ending of No Way Home was a promise that audiences would see Holland as a proper Spider-Man for the first time, with Brand New Day focusing on the character's classic elements from the comics such as fighting street-level crime in New York City, rather than dealing with world-ending events as in previous MCU appearances. Marvel thus wanted to include other street-level heroes that Holland's Spider-Man had not interacted with before, such as the Punisher and the Hulk. Pascal stated that these two characters were chosen because both face problems similar to Parker's. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings protagonist Su Shang-Chi was one of the heroes considered for an appearance in Brand New Day. Both new and returning villains appear in the film. Among the newer ones are Tombstone, Boomerang, Tarantula, and Ramrod. The creative team carefully selected the film's lineup of villains, combining recognizable Spider-Man antagonists with lesser-known ones, as they wanted Peter to face enemies he could realistically defeat within a day or two while also surprising longtime fans. The character Paste Pot Pete was one of the villains considered for the film who ultimately did not make the cut. While the villain Shocker from Homecoming does not appear in Brand New Day, Spider-Man uses his gauntlet to fight the Hulk. Holland said that the spell cast by Strange at the end of No Way Home to make everyone forget who Peter is presented some logistical issues for Brand New Day, specifically regarding its effects on the memories of characters such as Peter's ex-girlfriend, MJ, and his former best friend, Ned. Holland explained that the spell works in such a way that people remember Spider-Man, they remember their interactions with him, they just don't remember who he is except for one person. Brand New Day is set 4 years after the events of No Way Home and before those of Doomsday, with Holland stating that one reason for the long time gap between No Way Home and Brand New Day was to allow the characters to grow up off-screen. Batalon corroborated the statement by saying that Cretton gave the cast space to really explore their respective characters as they saw fit. Speaking to Brand New Day's relationship to Doomsday, which was originally scheduled to release before Brand New Day before moving to December 2026, Cretton said it allowed Brand New Day to stand on its own without needing to find a way to connect to Doomsday, and do certain things that would not have made sense or had been possible if it came out after Doomsday. Holland said that Peter is at the beginning of the darkest chapter of his life in Brand New Day as the plot focuses on the character's decision to suppress his trauma of being forgotten by neglecting his civilian life while dedicating himself full-time to being Spider-Man, a choice that Holland said prevents the character from realizing that the person he is makes him the hero that fans love. This premise addresses what Holland identified as one of the film's central themes, the inability to balance professional and personal life as Peter chooses to immerse himself in his work as a superhero rather than confront everything he has lost and reconnect with people in real life, making it difficult to regain balance after sacrificing his civilian identity, a message Holland considered important for young people in the digital age. The trauma of being forgotten by everyone, combined with the pressure of fighting crime full-time, triggers an evolution in Peter's superpowers. Among the changes is organic webbing, for which the filmmakers drew inspiration from the 2005 to 2006 The Other comic book crossover storyline. Cretton described the transformation as frightening, with Peter initially believing he is turning into a monster, though he ultimately learns to accept the changes he is undergoing. Costume designer Sanya Milkovic-Hayes returned from No Way Home and other MCU films, and production designer Charles Wood also returned from previous MCU media. Cretton had 8 or 9 comic book covers on the art department wall which he was planning to recreate in Brand New Day, including those of The Amazing Spider-Man number 129, Spider-Man's debut comic Amazing Fantasy Volume 1 number 15, August 1962, which shows Spider-Man swinging with a civilian, The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 number 134, July 1974, which shows Spider-Man fighting Tarantula, The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 number 221, July 1981, which shows Spider-Man dodging Ramrod, The Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1 #142, May 1988, in which Spider-Man is about to be thrown off the top of a building by Tombstone, The Punisher War Journal Volume 1 number 15, December 1989, which shows several guns aimed at Spider-Man and the Punisher, The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 number 345, March 1991, in which Spider-Man is attacked by Boomerang, Spider-Man Adventures number 2, November 1994, in which Spider-Man is struck by Scorpion's mechanical tail, and The New Avengers Volume 1 Number 27, February 2007. Which shows Ronan facing several members of the organization The Hand, led by Elektra Natchios. Many of these covers appear in the film's opening montage that shows what Peter has been up to since the end of No Way Home, with Cretton enjoying being able to choose covers that allowed us to imagine what could have happened a little bit before or a little bit after that frame that we're all used to seeing. Brand New Day recreates a page from Civil War Volume 1 Number 5, February 2006, that shows the Punisher carrying the body of a severely injured Spider-Man. Holland was involved in the process of creating the new Spider-Man suit for Brand New Day, focusing on the story reasons for why it looks the way that it does, while also researching which details fans liked most about the suits worn by Maguire's and Garfield's versions of Spider-Man to design the new one. Holland also wore both costumes, explaining that this helped shape the final design of the suit for Brand New Day. Those details included a tighter fitting mask to give Holland's Parker a more mature silhouette, while the proportions intentionally evoked artist John Romita Sr.'s take on the hero. The belt was positioned lower to create the illusion of a longer torso, much like the boot design, which aimed to achieve the same effect for the legs. Holland said the suit was constructed in a completely different way from the Spider-Man costumes he wore previously, which made it comfier and more flexible. The new suit is similar in design to the one that was introduced at the end of No Way Home, which was made by Holland's Parker following his interactions with both Maguire's and Garfield's Spider-Man in that film. The script for No Way Home explains that Parker took inspiration from the suits worn by those versions of the character when designing his own, which Holland described as a spider-child of the three costumes worn by all the iterations of Spider-Man that appeared in that film. He also liked the idea of Parker trying to be his big brothers, that he looks up to them and sees little details on their suits that he thinks are really cool, especially now that he is no longer connected to the Avengers and is making his own suit. Because Parker no longer has access to Stark's money and resources, he builds his own technology in the film, including an artificial intelligence, AI, called Evie, voiced by Naomi Watts, who previously worked with Holland on the film The Impossible, 2012, and a homemade hybrid machine called the Fabricator, a combination of a sewing machine and a 3D printer, that allows him to build and repair his own suit. Parker's spider sense, referred to as the Peter Tingle in previous MCU Spider-Man films, received a new sound effect for Brand New Day, designed to allow the audience to experience the power the same way Parker does. The production team analyzed online footage of wingsuit flyers and parkour athletes as a reference for the scenes where Spider-Man swings on his webs, observing not only their physical performance but also how they captured the action using GoPro cameras and selfie sticks. The production team did not want to rely too heavily on visual effects to portray Jean's body-hopping ability. Instead, Cretton hired his friend and dance choreographer Nathan Kim, who carefully mapped out the ways people's bodies would contort and twist to allow the audience to perceive when they are possessed. The Punisher's appearance draws inspiration from various comic book eras of the character, including the cover of the Punisher War Journal number 15. The creative team experimented with several versions of the Punisher's skull emblem before settling on a design that evoked artist John Buscema's look, in which the skull functions as a bullet magnet over Kevlar armor. The Hulk was given a more frightening appearance, inspired by his early comic book stories, with Ruffalo's facial features becoming less recognizable during the transformation to emphasize the character's monstrous nature. The filmmakers considered using the Hulk's original gray look from the comics dubbed Grey Hulk in Brand New Day before ultimately deciding that the audience should see him in his more familiar Green Savage Hulk version. Tarantula's chest emblem was discarded because it too closely resembled Spider-Man's. Instead, tactical straps were used over the character's suit to subtly recreate the shape of a spider. Principal photography began on August 3, 2025, in Glasgow, Scotland, under the working title Blue Oasis, with Brett Pollack returning as cinematographer from many of Cretton's previous films. Filming was originally expected to begin in early 2025, but was delayed by 6 months so Holland could film The Odyssey. He was inspired by Nolan's efficient and prepared filmmaking approach and wanted to bring a similar work ethic to Brand New Day, insisting that they have each day's filming planned ahead of time with a clear idea of what the film should be rather than trying to work it out during filming, and that real, practical stunts be performed whenever possible. Some of these stunts were inspired by the Marvel's Spider-Man game series, whose finishing moves Holland tried to incorporate into the film. Peng Zhang coordinated the film's fight sequences, returning from Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and other MCU projects. Holland asked the producers and Cretton to stop filming the scene where Spider-Man is hanging out with Ned for the first time since No Way Home, since the initial version shot did not feel organic and needed to be reworked. Production was scheduled for around 2 weeks throughout Glasgow city centre, including Merchant City, George Square, and Tron Gate, 4 scenes set in New York and one of the film's action set pieces. Holland was excited to start principal photography with location shooting, returning to the feeling of making Homecoming after production on No Way Home was restricted to sound stages due to shifts in the film industry caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. He was glad that fans could experience the start of filming with the cast and crew. Set photos from Glasgow showed armored vehicles with a Red Devil logo on them. Bradley Russell of Total Film compared this logo to the symbol for the Inner Demons gang, who are led by Mr. Negative in the comics, and speculated that Mr. Negative could be appearing in the film. Assistant prop modeler William Osborne explained that was because Wood had requested the application of certain symbols on the armored vehicle, including the devil, as well as a panther. Paul Traynor at Glasgow World reported that the Glasgow set was using a reference bust in the shape of a rhinoceros head, similar to the comic book character Rhino. The production team recreated the New York City borough of Queens both on the streets of Glasgow and on elaborate sets at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire, England. For the latter, they built the equivalent of about 3 city blocks, basing the design of the buildings on carefully selected areas near the Queensborough Bridge and focusing on the rooftops rather than street-level locations. Bernthal was set to film his scenes back-to-back with One Last Kill, which finished filming in early August 2025. Filming for Brand New Day took place at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey, England, on August 7, 4 scenes of Parker at Aunt May's grave. These were some of the first non-stunt scenes shot. After getting the necessary versions as written in the script, Cretton asked Holland to do another take that could be used for the end of the film. Holland improvised lines, and Cretton, who kept the scene in the film, felt those lines served as the film's North Star and helped distill the film down to a simple core idea and a place they could work backwards from. Trammell Tillman joined the cast at the end of August, as William Bill Metzger, the head of the Department of Damage Control, DODC. The film establishes that the DODC has a new headquarters in New York City and has been studying captured villains and their weaponry with the aim of repurposing that knowledge for law enforcement, relying on an arsenal built not only from those weapons but also from recovered alien technology, including that of the Chitauri, the Sakaarans, and Rocket Raccoon. Soundstage work for the film took place at Pinewood Studios for most of September. At the start of the month, Ruffalo said he had still not seen a script. Sink did not receive a script until she arrived in London for filming, which took place in the city's Battersea Park between early and mid-September. On September 19, Holland suffered a mild concussion while filming a stunt on the Pinewood set. Filming at Pinewood was subsequently paused until September 29 while Holland recovered. Also in late September 2025, Marvin Jones 3 was revealed to be portraying Lonnie Lincoln/Tombstone after voicing a different version of the character in Sony's animated film Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, 2018. Filming took place then at Phantom House in Basingstoke, England, with one of Holland's stunt doubles. Filming at Basingstoke continued in early October, with Holland joining the filming there, along with Mondo. Later that month, Holland, Sink, and Ruffalo were seen filming at Senate House in London. In early November, filming took place at Ravenscourt Park in London. Throughout November, filming took place at Home Prison Dorchester in Dorchester, England. Cretton announced on December 19, 2025, that filming had wrapped. Since the Hulk is created using motion capture and computer-generated imagery, CGI, Cretton initially did not expect Ruffalo himself to be on set for the scenes where his character is transformed, all of which he shared with Holland, who found filming with Ruffalo a really peculiar experience due to the motion capture process, which he felt made shooting those scenes seem somewhat ridiculous. The scenes recreating comic book covers were filmed at 420 frames per second, a rate Cretton described as virtually impossible for an actor to perform in, so much so that one of these shots of Spider-Man flying into the organization The Hand, which had previously been featured in Marvel Television's Netflix television series, required at least 65 takes. For the scene mimicking the cover of Spider-Man Adventures No. 2, Holland achieved the desired pose in 2 or 3 takes, a feat Cretton felt demonstrated how much control Tom has over every muscle in his body. Brand New Day is the first film to have particular sequences filmed specifically for Screen X, with its manufacturer CJ4D-Plex coming to set to shoot the footage that would appear on Screen X's side screens to create a panoramic viewing experience. 193 The film was shot in the 2.39:1 aspect ratio, with select sequences shot for IMAX. In January 2026, Justin Kroll from Deadline Hollywood reported that Feige had been solely focused on the production of Doomsday and its sequel Avengers: Secret Wars 2027 for the last year, and had let Pascal handle much of the production for Brand New Day. Cretton disputed this, saying, "Though Feige is busy, the film was not on the back burner in terms of his attention," adding that Feige, Pascal, and Rothman were all involved. In addition to Feige and Pascal, other producers on the film included Avi Arad, a frequent producer of the Spider-Man films, and Pascal's producing partner Rachel O'Connor. The film's first trailer was released in March 2026 and confirmed the appearance of the Hand. The filmmakers noted that the organization had been leaderless since the events of Marvel's Netflix television series and might reach its full potential under new guidance, with Brand New Day establishing that the Hand had become the new security team for the DODC. The trailer also revealed that Sabrina Guevara reprised her role as Sheila Rivera from Born Again for a scene in which her character hands Spider-Man the key to New York City. Eamon Esfandi was playing a new love interest for MJ, and that Keith David had an undisclosed role, subsequently confirmed to be the voice of the narrator in a nature documentary about spiders that Parker watches. In April, Holland said additional photography was taking place in London to add more humor and incorporate a villain plotline in a new way. He added that the film already worked before these changes and they were just putting icing on the cake. Feige indicated in mid-July that Florence Pugh would reprise her MCU role of Yelena Belova/Black Widow in Brand New Day, ahead of her appearance in Doomsday, which was confirmed at the end of the month. Around the same time, Rosario Dawson revealed she had reprised her role as Claire Temple from Marvel's Netflix television series for a scene in Brand New Day that ended up being cut. Additional actors appearing in the film include Marisa Tomei reprising her MCU role as Peter's deceased Aunt May Parker in flashbacks, stunt performer and martial artist Fan Xiaoshuang as Snow, the leader of the Hand, having previously worked on other Marvel Studios films such as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and The Marvels. 2023, Olivia Booth Ford as Sarah Gray, Jean's older sister, portrayed in the film as a mutant unlike the character's original depiction in the comics, where she is an ordinary human. Billy Clements as Ramrod, having previously portrayed the Russian in the MCU film Deadpool and Wolverine, 2024, and stunt performer Aidan Kennedy as both Boomerang and a member of the Hand. The opening logo for Marvel Studios features archival footage from previous MCU Spider-Man films as memories that Parker no longer shares with characters such as MJ and Ned. The end credits depict various casual images of New York City, captured by director Lloyd Lee Choi for the film. Cretton said it tied in with the film's theme about connection. Nat Sanders, Gina Sansom, and Harry Yoon edited Brand New Day, after Cretton previously worked with Sanders and Yoon on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and with Sansom on Wonder Man. The first assembly cut of Brand New Day was around 170 to 180 minutes, which was edited into a final cut of the film around 144 minutes that did not sacrifice any scenes. Regarding the film's editing, Holland said they implemented some of the notes given from the film's test screenings in a new edit of the film, which changed it in a way that totally didn't work, noting how it serviced the vision of random people rather than the creative team who had been continually working on the film. Cretton clarified Holland's comments, saying that version of the film still performed well in test screenings and was not dissimilar to the theatrical release, but Cretton said it was overcut, explaining that things are attempted to find the best version of the film, including having cuts shorter and longer than the final theatrical release. Jerome Chen served as visual effects supervisor, while David Bosco was the visual effects producer. Visual effects were provided by Sony Pictures Imageworks, Framestore, Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, Rise FX, Cantina Creative, Soho VFX, and SDFX Studios. Michael Giacchino was confirmed in December 2025 to be returning as composer from the previous MCU Spider-Man films. He removed some musical notes from his Spider-Man theme to represent the pieces of Parker's life that he has lost. A soundtrack album was released by Sony Classical on July 31, 2026. Ned's Spyday Tracker app uses the theme song from the animated series Spider-Man, 1967 to 1970. Cretton discussed the film at Sony's Cinemacon panel in March 2025, where Holland appeared via a video message to announce the title. Commentators noted the appropriateness of the title considering the Brand New Day comic book storyline explores a reset for Spider-Man following the events of the 2007 to 2008 One More Day storyline. There was speculation about what impact the events of Doomsday would have on the film and whether specific elements from Brand New Day would be adapted, such as having Parker make a deal with Mephisto to resurrect Aunt May. Kevin Erdman of Screen Rant said the One More Day and Brand New Day storylines were controversial, in part because they reverted Spider-Man's character growth and relationships. He felt the film could follow a similar storyline without undoing the character growth. On August 1, 2025, known as Spider-Man Day, Sony released an 8-second teaser showing glimpses of the new Spider-Man costume, featuring raised webbing similar to Maguire's suits, and the same faint hexagonal design on the red and blue fabric from Holland's previous suits. A 22-second teaser giving a full view of Holland in costume, directed by his brother Harry, was released the next day. Justin Carter at Gizmodo said the biggest change other than the raised webbing was the larger spider logo on the chest. Carter also noted the use of Giacchino's MCU Spider-Man theme in the teaser. Jordan Morrow at Variety said the full costume was closer to the comics than Holland's previous costumes, while McKinley Franklin of The Hollywood Reporter said it resembled the suits worn by Maguire and Garfield. On August 10, Sony released a behind-the-scenes video recapping the first day of filming. Variety's Jack Dunn felt Sony and Marvel had been generous with the amount of looks at the film so far. The first trailer was released on March 18, 2026. Sony partnered with fans and content creators to release short clips of the trailer on the previous day. Tom Bacon at comicbook.com compared this release strategy to a cast announcement live stream that Marvel Studios used for Doomsday the prior year, noting how both were intended to maximize engagement throughout the day. Rebecca Jacobs at Men's Journal and Caitlin Booth of Bleeding Cool both described the rollout as a scavenger hunt. Commentators noted that the footage includes the film's homage to the cover of Amazing Fantasy No. 15, and revealed that Parker's superpowers are mutating to include organic web shooters and black eyes. Some believed this was an adaptation of the Other or the Six Arms saga from the Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 #100, 102, 1971. Sony said the trailer became the most viewed ever, with 718.6 million views in 24 hours according to market research firm Wave Metrics. It surpassed the record for a film trailer, Deadpool and Wolverine's 365 million views in 8 hours, and surpassed the overall 24-hour record set by the video game Grand Theft Auto 6, 2026. Wave Metrics further reported that the trailer surpassed 1.1 billion views within 4 days, the first film trailer to cross that threshold. Rothman and Holland introduced footage from the film at Cinemacon in April 2026. A second trailer was released on June 17, which gave a better understanding of the film's plot according to Casey Loving at The Wrap. He highlighted the return of Banner's uncontrollable Savage Hulk persona, and noted the apparent narration from Marissa Tomei's May Parker. Commentators discussed the appearance of a mysterious hooded figure in the trailer, whom they believed to be Sync's character. Wavemetrics reported that, in 1 week, the second trailer gathered 590.8 million views, becoming the second most viewed trailer of all time. Sony screened the first 18 minutes of the film at the Cine Europe convention later that month. A final trailer was released on July 21. It largely contained footage from the 3 previous MCU Spider-Man films, which Jermaine Lucie from Gizmodo said worked well to establish the emotional stakes of Brand New Day. Bernthal presented a clip from the film at the 2026 San Diego Comic-Con in late July, showing Spider-Man and the Punisher fighting the Hulk. The promotional campaign included $309 million worth of media value from promotional partners, the most ever for a film, surpassing the $288 million for Far From Home, with Little Caesars and McDonald's providing the most value. Sony partnered with 165 brands, with Little Caesars, Samsung, Asus, BMW, with their BMW 9 3 and 5 Series sedan, and Liquid IV receiving promotional placement within the film. On June 17, 2026, Samsung launched an online interactive fan experience of the Spy Day tracker, allowing fans to follow updates for the film and submit real-world Spider-Man sightings. On June 27, Sony and Little Caesars opened a replica of Parker's apartment as a fan experience in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. The space featured Easter eggs from the film, including a first look at Jones as Tombstone and the reveal of Colin Zayas' role, and promoted Little Caesars as Spider-Man-inspired Webirani pizza. A Zillow listing was also created for the apartment. The experience received a massive 20,000 reservations to attend. At the end of June 2026, Sony released a promotional video in conjunction with the start of the 2026 FIFA World Cup knockout stage, which saw Argentina national football team player Lionel Messi meeting Parker in a cafe while searching for Spider-Man using the Spy Day tracker app. Commercials for Samsung and Liquid IV, both featuring Batalon as Ned alongside Spider-Man, were released in mid-July. The Samsung commercial, promoting the 8th Galaxy Z series, was directed by Kasra Farahani with cinematography by Pollack, while the Liquid IV commercial promoted the brand's limited release flavors created for the film. Batalon, in character as Ned, and Spider-Man appeared at Samsung's July 2026 Galaxy Unpacked event in London to further promote the phones. A commercial for Major League Baseball, MLB, showed Spider-Man interacting with Juan Soto of the New York Mets and the team's mascot, Mr. Met, at Citi Field. The Spider-Man suit from Brand New Day, referred to as the Fresh Start suit, was added as a free update for the video game Marvel's Spider-Man 2, 2023, on July 28, with skins and accessories related to the film also being added to the video game Fortnite Battle Royale, 2017. Brand New Day also partnered with Google for its Street View and Search, and TikTok's Spotlight program in 48 international markets. By the film's release, it had a social media reach of 2.86 billion according to social media analytics firm Relishmix, which was the most ever recorded, surpassing the 2.4 billion of Avengers: Endgame, 2019. Spider-Man: Brand New Day premiered at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, on July 27, 2026. Distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing, the film began its international release on July 29, including in the United Kingdom, opening in the majority of its markets over the next 2 days into the weekend. In the United States, early screenings occurred for Amazon Prime members on July 29, before opening on July 31 in 4,487 theaters. It was released in ScreenX, being the first film to be specifically shot for that format and marketed under the Shot for ScreenX program, as well as RealD 3D, D-Box, Dolby Cinema, and 4DX. It was also initially released in IMAX in select international markets, such as China, Japan, and Korea. Brand New Day was previously scheduled for release on July 24 but was pushed back a week so it would be released 2 weeks after The Odyssey instead of one, avoiding contention for the majority of IMAX screens, which The Odyssey had exclusively for 4 weeks. After Brand New Day's opening weekend, it was announced that the film would become available in IMAX globally starting August 6, sharing digital screens with The Odyssey, while that film retained exclusive use of IMAX's 70mm theaters. Disney had intended to release an unspecified Marvel Studios film on that initial July date, but removed this from their release schedule in August 2024, which allowed Sony to schedule Brand New Day then. It is part of Phase 6 of the MCU. In April 2021, Sony signed deals with Netflix and Disney for the rights to their 2022 to 2026 film slate, following the films' theatrical and home media windows. Netflix signed for exclusive Pay 1 window streaming rights, which is typically an 18-month window and included future Spider-Man films following No Way Home. Disney signed for Pay 2 window rights for the films, which would be streamed on Disney Plus and Hulu as well as broadcast on Disney's linear television networks. In January 2026, Sony and Netflix announced a new agreement giving Netflix Pay 1 window rights globally, an increase from just the United States, Germany, and Southeast Asia in the previous deal. The new agreement would begin later in 2026 as territory rights become available, before being fully in effect in early 2029. As of August 6, 2026, Spider-Man: Brand New Day has grossed $510 million in the United States and Canada, and $706 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $1.216 billion, making it the highest-grossing film of 2026. Its $932 million opening weekend was the second best of all time behind Avengers: Endgame, 2019, which included the highest global opening for a ScreenX and 4DX film combined. On Monday, August 3, it became the second fastest film to gross $1 billion, doing so in 6 days. The film had the best first-day ticket pre-sales in 5 years since No Way Home in 2021, which had an estimated $78 million in pre-sales. This was later updated to $150 million total pre-sales, a record. Dolby CIA also saw record pre-sales, having nearly 2/3 of available tickets sold. It had the highest opening weekend gross of all time at $360 million, surpassing Endgame, $357.1 million. Wednesday and Thursday preview screenings accounted for $72 million, surpassing the record previously held by Endgame, $60 million. The opening day gross, including previews, of $169.8 million also surpassed Endgame's record, $157.4 million. The Saturday and Sunday grosses of $101.5 million and $88.7 million, respectively, were both second best all-time to Endgame, $109.2 million and $90.3 million. Pre-release estimates had the film grossing $260 to $280 million in its opening weekend, with Sony estimating a $195 million opening. Its fourth and fifth days of release saw the highest Monday and Tuesday grosses of any film at $47 million and $42 million, respectively, and its Wednesday gross of $32.7 million was the second best behind Star Wars: The Force Awakens, 2015. On Thursday, August 6, it became the fastest film to gross $500 million, doing so in 7 days. It is the highest-grossing film of 2026. The film grossed $573 million its opening weekend, surpassing the pre-release estimates of $275 to $300 million. It opened as the #1 film in 66 box office markets and had the highest-grossing opening weekend all-time in at least 11 countries, including France, $26.6 million, Brazil, $23.8 million, Spain, $15.6 million, and Peru, $8.6 million. As of August 4, 2026, the film's top-grossing markets include China, $132.9 million, the United Kingdom, $55.6 million, Mexico, $43.6 million, India, $35.4 million, and France, $31.4 million. It is the highest-grossing film of 2026. Brand New Day received largely positive reviews from critics, with some calling it the best and most mature of the MCU Spider-Man films, and praise going to Holland's performance and the more grounded, character-driven story. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, 90% of 393 critics gave a positive review and the average of rated reviews was 7.6/10. The critics' consensus reads, "Spinning a web of spectacular set pieces together with mature emotional stakes and Tom Holland's soulful performance, Brand New Day is a promising reset that portends Spidey will remain sticky on the big screen for years to come." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned a score of 66 out of 100 based on 56 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, while 88% of those surveyed by Post-Track said they would definitely recommend the film. Pete Hammond for Deadline Hollywood called Brand New Day a dark and thrilling new chapter for the franchise, praising Holland's performance, Cretton's direction, and the film's balance of character drama and superhero action. Owen Gleiberman at Variety praised the film for its action, villain, and Holland's performance, but described the film as arduous, clunkily episodic, and half an hour too long, arguing that it is more self-serious than emotionally involving. Peter Bradshaw for The Guardian praised the ambitious tone, strong performances, and emotional focus, particularly highlighting Zendaya and Holland's chemistry. However, he found the film uneven, with some familiar superhero elements limiting its impact. William Bibbiani of The Wrap praised Brand New Day as a fantastic film about Peter Parker and one of the highlights of the whole franchise, commending its emotional, character-driven story and the performances of Holland and Bernthal, despite criticizing the villain's plan as illogical. Empire's John Nugent gave the film 4 out of 5 stars, praising its grounded, comic-faithful approach and Holland's performance, describing Spider-Man as still Marvel's ace in the pack, while noting that the second half loses momentum due to unnecessary ties to the wider MCU. David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter praised Cretton's direction for balancing adrenaline and feeling, while highlighting the humanity that has always been Spidey's greatest strength, Holland's never-better performance, and the film's emotional focus on Peter, though he criticized occasional pacing issues and plot convolutions. David Ehrlich at IndieWire gave the film a C, describing it as a dull and downbeat action sequel that causes more problems than it cures, criticizing its pacing, its reliance on MCU setup, and its failure to meaningfully advance Peter's story, although he praised Holland's performance and considered Cretton a more sure-footed stylist than Watts. David Fear for Rolling Stone criticized the film for relying too heavily on fan service, MCU crossovers, and franchise setup at the expense of Spider-Man's story, arguing that Peter risks becoming a supporting player in his own movie, while praising Holland's performance and the emotional scenes between Peter and MJ. Pascal stated in November 2021 that Brand New Day was planned to be the first film in a new Spider-Man trilogy. In early 2026, Holland revisited his previous comments about not wanting to play Spider-Man past the age of 30 and hoping to pass the mantle to another actor. Since the latter had not yet happened by his 30th birthday, Holland said he may need to change the quote to 37 and added that playing Spider-Man has been the joy of my life. I'll do it for as long as they'll have me. In July, Holland said he had a clear vision for how to pass the mantle. Feige said Miles Morales would be introduced in live action following the release of Beyond the Spider-Verse, and he had discussed ideas for the next 5 Spider-Man films with Pascal. The latter hoped Cretton would be involved in future films, and Cretton said he was open to directing another. Following Brand New Day's release, Rothman said there had not yet been concrete discussions about Holland returning for a 5th film, while Feige said Holland and Zendaya would be taking a break before any new plans were confirmed. When Doctor Strange did his magical Alakazam and repaired the broken multiverse, it made life pretty rough for Peter Parker. I mean, Strange did the right thing, but Peter has been, well, living a resolutely isolated life ever since. Now, don't get me wrong, that's sort of what Peter had in mind. He wanted the world to forget he ever existed. It was safer that way. After Aunt May's death, he definitely didn't want to endanger the lives of anyone else he cared for. So, making himself into a nobody that nobody remembered seemed the smartest thing to do. On the plus side, Peter has gotten really good at being Spider-Man. He has a sweet, tech-filled setup in his attic apartment, an advanced AI assistant, his own 3D suit printer, and he's working hand-in-web with the police. In fact, the city's crime rate has dropped like a stone. He simply thwips his way around the city, wrapping up thugs and snatching innocents out of harm's way. Problem is, nobody loves Peter Parker. And no spider is an island. Peter is feeling the weight of being isolated. Loneliness and his ever-constant crime fighting is stressing him out to the max. Hey, Peter even tiptoed over to meet the people he once loved most, former girlfriend, MJ, and best bud, Ned. But they seemed, frankly, quite happy without him. Peter even got an eyeful of MJ snogging her new boyfriend. Ugh. Fact is, though, there are bigger things tangled up in Peter's web right now. For one, his body is changing. Is it some kind of hormonal shift brought on by extreme stress? Is it some further mutation of his radioactive arachnid DNA? Peter isn't sure, but he's oddly developed his own organic webbing, the very same goopy stuff that he once marveled over a different Peter Parker having. Ah, the multiverse. Then there are the migraines, the blackouts, the sporadic bouts of rage, the overwhelming heightened senses and increased strength. Peter must learn how to control these new developments or risk badly hurting the innocents he wants to protect. That, however, isn't even the worst of it. There's also a new threat creating chaos in New York City. A mysterious individual, entity, with the power to control minds and jump from one mind to the next is a new and dangerous threat. Who can Peter trust, or fight, when anyone can attack him from any direction? This individual could lay waste to the populace by simply controlling the wrong powerful people. If someone like the Hulk came under that control, for instance, buildings could be demolished in minutes. It's up to Peter to discover what this new foe is seeking. He must save a frightened city. He needs to figure out how to control his own body. And he's gotta keep from going crazy with loneliness. Man, it's a tough time for a nobody named Peter Parker. Early on, we see Spider-Man jumping into heroic acts to stop marauding thugs and save groups of innocent civilians from danger. People cheer the superhero's attempts to clear the streets of evil. And they hold up signs and stand vigil to show their support when he later gets hurt. With time, Peter crosses paths with MJ and voices his regret for past actions he's made. He also makes it clear that some of his new abilities might qualify him as a monster rather than a hero. MJ makes it clear that she doesn't share Peter's memories or feelings. But her observations of him suggest that he's a really good guy, who might just be changing. Peter also turns to Frank Castle, the Punisher, for help. The two clash but work together, gaining one another's respect. Frank notes to Peter that if he could bring back his lost loved ones for even 1 second, he wouldn't hide anything behind a mask. He'd make his feelings open and plain. Peter relives memories of Aunt May comforting him and supporting him after learning about his abilities. Later Peter uses that same memory to demonstrate to a wounded and grieving person that healing from painful tragedy is possible with the help of people who accept you for who you are and step up to help and love you no matter what. Just because we've lost someone, it doesn't mean that we have to do this alone, Peter declares. Even if that's true, I have no one, this grieving individual states. Peter offers his own friendship and backs it up with self-sacrificial action. Someone jokingly suggests that the mind control Spider-Man encounters might be caused by a ghost or demon. After Spider-Man is hospitalized, a person in a crowd of well-wishers holds up a sign requesting prayer for the injured hero. Spider-Man goes to see Yelena Belova, the new Avengers Black Widow, for advice. She meets him in a spa pool and demands he disrobe and join her. We see her bared shoulders and his badly bruised, undershorts-clad body. It's later clarified that Yelena does all her business meetings in this manner so that she can verify her visitors are not carrying weapons, and, she says, so they can all have a relaxing soak. Peter also wakes up wrapped in a web cocoon he's created and dangles in the air dressed in nothing but undershorts. Superhero violence abounds here, ranging from Spider-Man barely avoiding gun blasts, speeding vehicles, and wielded weapons to him leaping into massive battles with super-powered enemies. And whenever Peter removes his mask, or shirt, he is always bruised and cut. The hero is nearly impaled on several occasions, and he's shot in the back by a high-powered sniper shot while protecting someone. A tank-like vehicle bulldozes its way down a city street, smashing vehicles and unleashing cannon-like fire. Spider-Man swings and scrambles quickly to steer the vehicle away from bystanders with webbing, and he struggles to keep the explosive destruction to a minimum. Eventually he's able to flip the tank through a huge concrete wall to stop it. The vehicle then explodes, taking down the entire building, and potentially, its occupants. Peter battles against a massive and raging Bruce Banner turned Hulk, who batters the smaller man viciously, literally tearing up the side of a skyscraper in the process and trying to crush the small hero beneath his huge pummeling hands. At the same time, Frank Castle riddles the Hulk with high-powered rounds to the face and body and hits him with explosive charges. Peter also fights with a group of ninjas called the Hand. They acrobatically leap around, battering Spider-Man, slashing at him with katana swords and shooting him with specially made anti-Spider-Man weapons. The mysterious telepath controls dozens of people, sometimes forcing innocent people to jump in front of speeding vehicles or jump off rooftops. At one point, this individual takes control of a huge city block, possessing scores of people, blowing out walls and windows and holding one man captive with sharp, floating shards of glass. Peter suffers through several painful migraine attacks and clutches his arms and body while riddled by sharp pains. Peter's AI assistant, Ev, suggests that the changes are caused by Peter's extreme emotional stress and a hormonal surge. We also see him convulsing in pain from his heightened senses and falling from several rooftops as he loses control. When Peter has these attacks, his eyes turn black, and he tends to lose control as he goes into a rage. In one incident, he batters a villain to the ground leaving him torn and bloody. Peter also flails about with a large object, flipping a police car and almost killing the cop inside. Someone gets shot in the back and falls over as blood pools beneath him. Ned buys large canisters of beer and takes them to a party where guests are drinking beer and other adult beverages. Ned also purchases some energy drinks that he claims are very addictive. Several people get knocked unconscious by drug-laced darts. Peter goes to Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, and asks about developing tech that might cancel out some of his new powers. Banner asks him, "How would you decide? What parts of nature are good or bad?" We see that Peter faithfully follows his friend, Ned's, social media page, though he never contacts him. And we also see Peter avoid a woman in his apartment building who tries to flirt with him. Both actions testify to Peter's attempts to insulate people from any threat that might be associated with him. We eventually realize that a government official has lied repeatedly and manipulated powerful individuals to act as offensive tools the government can use. It's implied that this official also conducted scientific experiments on someone and eventually killed that person in pursuit of her power. Someone talks about urinating. Peter steals someone's clothes. When Peter begins to spurt organic web fluid from his wrists, he gags over the grossness of it all. Spider-Man, Brand New Day is a comic book movie through and through. And like many new comic books hitting stores these days, that's not always a good thing. On the one hand, this pick uses an impressive blend of CGI special effects and practical stunt work to not only give us a nicely crafted perspective on Spider-Man's new runaway senses and beefed up abilities, but it also creates some spectacular action sequences that feel plucked right off a colorful graphic novel page. There are Marvel Easter eggs everywhere. And this Spider-Man story cracks open the door for hints about the future of other Marvel franchises, such as the New Avengers and, SHH, the X-Men. In addition, Brand New Day promotes the idea that while there is evil in the world that will attack and tear at the very things we love most, it's the steadying love of those closest to us, our family members, our dearest friends, that calms us, that soothes us. The movie decries loneliness and cautions against isolating yourself. And Brand New Day declares that asking for help is a sign of bravery, not weakness. The kindness and caring love of those around us are the superpowers we need when the world grows dark. On the other hand, this film isn't all smooth web swinging for your typical family audience. As you might expect, there is pounding, blasting, bullet riddling and scenic destruction aplenty here. Think, the Hulk demolishing a concrete and girder building with Spidey's face while Frank Castle blasts automatic weapon fire into the raging Greenie's eyes. There are no deaths on display in the mix, but some are implied. Spider-Man is certainly bludgeoned and bloodied from head to toe. And scores of others are badly battered as well. So while goriness is reined in, blood still drips from many a wound. The biggest family drawback, though, is probably the foul language in the dialogue. Brand New Day may be a comic book actioner, but it's a relatively foul-mouthed one, especially when the Punisher cuts loose with his blue language blasts. So, yes, there is plenty of superhero action and sparkling CGI to enjoy in this latest Spidey fare, but Mom and Dad might find their special parental senses tingling quite a bit, too. Covering the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I've often felt like Spider-Man must feel when web-slinging around New York. When gravity pulls Spidey downward and accelerates him, it's the same sense of exhilaration I often feel watching one of these movies. But at the upward arc, as he gets some height and starts to decelerate, there's a moment he lingers midair, an almost weightless instant that nothing's happening. What follows could be another web line and swing, or Spider-Man could do nothing and go splat on the pavement. This reminds me of the time in between MCU entries. I become cynical and start to think about how these big-budget comic book movies contributed to the current state of Hollywood, how they've killed the mid-budget movie, overtaken theater screens, and made studios more interested in IP than originality. But then I see something like Spider-Man, Brand New Day, and I feel that rush again, and I'm right back there with the web head, zipping toward the next adventure. To be sure, the latest installment is the best of Tom Holland's 4 Spider-Man features thanks to its emotional payoffs and surprising new story threads, which Marvel Studios has kept under wraps with sworn secrecy and vague marketing. Screenwriters Chris McKenna and Eric Summers return, having shaped the series since Spider-Man: Homecoming, 2017, through its 2 sequels, Far From Home, 2019, and No Way Home, 2021. The writers weave an elaborate web from threads established in earlier MCU movies and TV shows, using heartfelt emotions and themes that promise exciting things to come for these characters and the grander cinematic universe. Admittedly, part of why I enjoyed Brand New Day so much is that the movie's storyline hadn't been telegraphed to me in overly detailed trailers. That said, I allude to many of the hush-hush plot elements below. So if you missed the spoiler warning above, consider this a second warning to stop reading and finish after you've seen the movie. Destin Daniel Cretton, director of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, 2021, and this year's Wonder Man TV series, a grounded Hollywood satire set in the MCU, opens his film with Peter Parker living in the aftermath of the fanservice, multiversal mayhem of No Way Home. His beloved Aunt May, Marissa Tomei, died in that movie, and any memories of Peter have been magically wiped from the minds of his former high school pals, his best friend Ned, Jacob Batalon, and his first love MJ, Zendaya, both now enrolled at MIT. His only friend, if that word applies, is NYPD Detective Jean DeWolf, Liza Colanzais, the Commissioner Gordon to Peter's Bruce Wayne. Peter's solitude eats away at him, not that he allows himself a moment to think about it. Without friends or family, Peter has devoted himself to his alter ego. An early montage shows him ridding New York streets of several B-grade villains, the Ninja Gang The Hand, the albino crime lord Tombstone, Marvin Jones III, and Mac Gargan, Michael Mondo, who dons a mechanical tail and calls himself Scorpion. More urgent than Spider-Man's rogues gallery is a sudden shift in Peter's arachnid DNA, imbuing him with disorientingly heightened senses and physical web shooters in his wrists. Maybe he's worried about becoming the tarantula-like man-spider, so he researches what's happening to him and tries to restore his usual DNA balance. He also yearns for his old friends and keeps tabs on them from a not-so-safe distance, and in doing so, puts them in danger from a curious antagonist who can possess people's minds, leaping between them like the killer from Fallen, 1998. This unnamed figure learns Peter's identity and attempts to exploit his love for MJ, if only to distract him from a plan to infiltrate the government's Department of Damage Control. The secretive organization, run by Bill Metzger, Trammell Tillman, aims to redirect destructive energy into something useful. It's a sly way of saying it polices superheroes, going so far as to nab them off the streets in veritable kidnappings, imagery that cannot help but evoke footage of ICE taking random Americans off the streets because they look different. If the plot in the first half sounds overstuffed with characters, it echoes the material's comic book roots, where other Marvel characters might show up in the pages of The Amazing Spider-Man for a single issue, contribute some facet to the story, and then move on. However, both John Bernthal's Punisher and Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner appear in extended supporting roles, and each allows for memorable set pieces with considerable dramatic weight. After this year's mind-numbing hour-long special, The Punisher, One Last Kill, Bernthal returns as a softer, slightly less unhinged version of Frank Castle, one capable of humor and aching remorse. Elsewhere, Banner teaches physics at ESU and has developed a suppressor that will curb his transformations into the Hulk. Peter hopes to modify that gizmo to prevent whatever's happening to his DNA. But as genial as Ruffalo is playing Banner, his character's fractured mind conceals a deep-seated rage. Both he and Peter learn that no matter how much someone wants to repress a naturally occurring feeling or change, the repressed will return with a vengeance. Brand New Day's central theme is less about the difficulties of being a superhero than the dangers of trying to prevent the inevitable, whether it's feelings bubbling to the surface or a sweeping evolution. This feeds into the story in a fourth-act twist, when Peter's mysterious enemy is revealed to be a teen whose supernatural abilities signal the future of humanity and, by extension, the MCU's exciting next phase. Sadie Sink plays the character, whom I won't reveal here, with a fiery intensity that recalls her best work on Netflix's Stranger Things and Fear Street trilogy. Her character enriches the movie's themes about change and the repression of emotions, and signals the arrival of mutants, as well as those who fear and target them, in the MCU. But like Peter, her character has no one else. And without someone to talk to, processing grief and trauma becomes a woeful prospect, leaving several characters, Spidey, Hulk, Punisher, etc., to lash out violently in ways they regret later. Of course, there's no denying that Brand New Day is an archetypal superhero movie in the summer blockbuster mold, catering to crowds hungry for big-screen spectacles, popcorn, and escapism. On that front, the movie delivers. As Cretton proved with Shang-Chi, he's a superb director of dance-like battles, often drawing on wuxia visuals and slow motion to deliver iconic frames. In Brand New Day, he sets the action to a playful blend of needle drops and Michael Giacchino's score. If the production's not-so-great CGI looks questionable, particularly in those scenes of Spider-Man and MJ swinging through the city, the well-developed emotional stakes mean the action scenes never feel like spectacle for their own sake. An encounter between Spider-Man, Hulk, and Punisher ends with a devastating dramatic turn, and later, the thrilling finale comes equipped with a Neo-level moment and a gasp-inducing climax that leads to potential tears. While entertaining, the action seems like an afterthought to the movie's drama, though they are thoughtfully woven into the story. And though the 145-minute runtime feels somewhat long in the moment, it's only because the writers have a few tricks up their sleeves. Upon reflection, the movie earns its length. At the center of Spider-Man, Brand New Day is the charming rapport between real-life couple Holland and Zendaya, who have an earnest chemistry and play off each other well. Both have matured as performers since first playing Peter and MJ nearly 10 years ago, and their growth is evident here, lending an extra textual gravitas to their rather bittersweet dynamic. Best of all, what at first seems like a typical Spider-Man faces a mysterious new villain movie is really a mega-budget yarn about the necessity of friends, the inevitability of emotional release, and the acceptance that things change. Although the rest of the MCU is still having banal discussions about the multiverse, leading to this December's Avengers, Doomsday and next year's Avengers, Secret Wars, Spider-Man remains anchored by heartwarming, and heartbreaking, drama and multidimensional characters. This level of intimacy and emotionally driven storytelling may be lacking from the two overcrowded MCU crossover events to come, so savor it here while you can. In movies, superheroes don't tend to want for company. They organize themselves into leagues and squads and dynamic duos. They've got fans in every corner of the metropolis, as well as some pretty major significant others. Even Batman the nihilist Avenger snaps back to being Bruce Wayne the social butterfly. But in Spider-Man, Brand New Day, Peter Parker, Tom Holland, has become a workaholic crime fighter, driven but isolated. We see him nab a slew of villains with sticky web precision, then head back to the corroded New York attic apartment where he lives like a hermit, surrounded by computer screens, tinkering with electromechanic devices that are designed to hone and focus his powers. But it's a lonely crusade. Peter, while no longer a high school student or an MIT wannabe, Tom Holland is now 30, and has grown into a more stylishly confident actor, is obsessed with perusing the social media videos posted by MJ, Zendaya, the love of his life, and Ned, Jason Batalon, his smart-mouth best friend. All their memories of Peter were wiped away by Doctor Strange at the end of Spider-Man: No Way Home. Doing that was the only way that Peter could save the multiverse. Now, when the three of them finally meet up, MJ and Ned look at Peter and see a total stranger. As for Peter's beloved Aunt May, Marissa Tomei, she was killed in the last film. Is it any wonder that he's a Spider-Man gone taxi driver? In 2021, No Way Home made $800 million in the US alone. No, that isn't a misprint. The film earned close to $2 billion worldwide. And while it's tempting to say that this many fans can't be wrong, my own experience of No Way Home was that its flamboyantly convoluted tale of triplicate Spider-Men, Holland, Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, was a brilliantly orchestrated, deviously cynical stunt of nostalgia star marketing, not to mention a movie that gave me a profound headache. Coming after No Way Home, Spider-Man: Brand New Day feels at moments like a bomb of contemplative drama. The new movie was directed by Destin Cretton, the gifted indie filmmaker who took a leap into Marvel fantasy with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, 2021. In Brand New Day, you feel how hard he's working to craft a comic book movie that's thoughtful, humane, and mature. But when you can feel how hard a movie is working to be those things, it tends to detract from the goal. In outline, Brand New Day covers the waterfront of what we want from a superhero movie. It's got a satisfying quota of bombastic and vertiginous action, notably an extended sequence, set inside and outside a skyscraper, where Mark Ruffalo's Hulk comes stomping into the picture. He's working with the dark side, but mostly he's just there so we can have some Hulk time. It's got a hero with a healthy dollop of inner turmoil under his wholesome facade, as well as a likably disgruntled action prole turned by John Bernthal as Punisher and a villain who's far from a hissable cartoon. Yet if the movie is fun at times, it's also arduous, overly episodic, and half an hour too long. I was glad to see that Brand New Day doesn't get lost in the superhero fatigue syndrome of CGI overkill, but the movie is more busy and self-serious than it is emotionally involving. Part of the problem is the amnesia plot. For a while, it's playful and poignant that Peter, when he finds himself in the same room with MJ, has to confront the fact that she has no memory of him. These scenes now carry a meta-teen idol dimension, since the two stars got married earlier this year. After a while, though, the basic situation becomes a bit dramatically frustrating. We want the relationship between Peter and MJ to be a journey, not a frozen piece of sad irony. Brand New Day was written by the Marvel movie veterans Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, whose storyline comes at us in blocks of concept. Early on, Peter discovers he's losing his powers, or, rather, that as a result of too much concentrated arachnid DNA, his powers have been discombobulated. We think that maybe we're going to see an echo of the dramatic drama of Superman 2, one of the classics of the superhero genre. Peter, however, just needs to repair himself with an inhibitor, a silvery doohickey that he affixes to the back of his neck. He gets his powers in line again. But if Brand New Day was going to introduce this conflict, the film should have sustained it to the end, not just presented it as an open and shut chapter. For a while, the villain is intriguing, a mysterious force who can enter the mind of anyone, except Spider-Man. This dark ability is expressed by the image of people getting knocked back, one after another, as if by a magnetic field, as the villain's telepathic abilities jump from one host to the next. Spider-Man might be talking to someone who says something sinister, and we realize they're just channeling the villain. But so what? The film thinks this concept is more resonant than it is, it's out of a B-horror movie. At last, we learn who the villain is, and she's not quite a villain. She's actually a character with an honorable and sympathetic motivation. Sadie Sink plays her with heartfelt urgency, but what, exactly, is the dramatic point of a villainous showdown that turns into a love fest? It's as if the movie were presenting comic book villains as an identity group in need of salvation. Destin Cretton stages the spy day action with a clever, leaping grandeur that delivers what these movies need to. Brand New Day is destined to make a boatload of money, because when it comes to the primal appeal of Peter Parker, the high-flying web-shooting lover boy in his red and blue spandex, this is a series that will not quit. You can appreciate that the filmmakers tried to serve up something besides the same old connect the multiverse dots adventure. But Brand New Day is watchable without ever being transporting. The result is one of the strongest Spider-Man films yet, balancing thrilling superhero action with surprisingly heartfelt moments. Following the events of Spider-Man: No Way Home, Peter Parker, Tom Holland, has devoted himself entirely to protecting New York as its friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Yet living a life of sacrifice comes at a cost. As strange new crimes begin sweeping the city, Peter finds himself facing an increasingly dangerous threat while experiencing unexpected changes that challenge him physically, emotionally, and personally. Without venturing into spoiler territory, Brand New Day wisely embraces its fresh start. Familiar faces remain, but the story opens the door to exciting new characters and relationships that keep the franchise feeling fresh. Longtime Marvel fans will enjoy the many surprises along the way, while newcomers should have little trouble following the central story. His portrayal of Peter Parker captures the awkwardness, humor, and selflessness that have defined the character for generations. Zendaya once again brings warmth and emotional depth, with the chemistry between the pair continuing to anchor the franchise, even as circumstances around them change. One of the film's standout additions is Jon Bernthal's Punisher. His hard-edged, uncompromising approach to justice provides the perfect contrast to Spider-Man's hopeful optimism. Their interactions highlight two very different visions of heroism, adding maturity and tension without ever overwhelming the heart of Peter's story. The action is inventive, the humor lands consistently, and the emotional stakes feel genuine. Sony may continue searching for success with its broader Spider-Man universe, but it remains clear that Peter Parker is still the heart of the franchise. My Spidey senses are tingling. I have a good feeling about the opening of Spider-Man, Brand New Day this weekend. If the theater I attended was any indication, this is going to be a massive box office success. There was one moment, which I'll get to later, that made the whole theater gasp. The real winners: Tom Holland, Jon Bernthal, and Zendaya, all of whom also starred in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Here's my review of that film, which opened to a massive global box office just 2 weeks prior. While the films are about as different as two films can be, there are some very weird similarities between The Odyssey and Spider-Man, Brand New Day, now that I think about it, but I suppose that makes sense since both come from the heroic tradition. One is about a lonely hero trying to get back to the ones he loves while encountering strange monsters and other obstacles. The other is about a lonely hero trying to get back to the ones he loves, encountering strange monsters and hoping that his love will still be there waiting when he returns. Both of these men are battered by their pasts, by the actions they took to protect the ones they loved, by the loss and the terrible cost of victory. Odysseus was just the Spider-Man of Homer's ancient Greece. Beyond these striking plot similarities, however, these two films could not be more different. And the three major actors who play characters in each film. And an almost fanatical devotion to the Pope. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. It's kind of hard to believe, but Spider-Man, No Way Home came out in 2021. 5 years ago. I honestly didn't realize it had been so long, but then again I hadn't been thinking about Spider-Man all that much, or Marvel, or superhero movies for that matter. For the most part, these have been pretty lackluster, in both the MCU and DCU. Captain America, Brave New World was pretty awful, proving that it's really not that easy to swap out Steve Rogers, especially with such a lousy script. Over in DC land, Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn promised to bring about a new era of awesomeness, but his opening salvo, Superman, was lackluster and messy, even though they nailed the casting. And while Peacemaker almost made up for that with a solid second season, then along came Supergirl, and now DC's hopes are all pinned to Clayface, of all the villains you could possibly pin any hopes to. So I've been a little checked out when it comes to superhero stuff, not because I don't enjoy it, but because it's been, for the most part, so dull and so mediocre outside of the diamond in the rough scattered here and there, and Peacemaker and Wonder Man, gems they may be, are both TV shows. When Spider-Man, No Way Home came out 5 years ago, I said it was one of the best superhero movies in years. I'm repeating myself now, but Spider-Man, Brand New Day is one of the best superhero movies in years. Only, this one is better. Yes, No Way Home had lots of fun cameos. The three Spideys all together, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland were quite the Three Musketeers, and it was a fun gimmick, and, of course, you can never go wrong with Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. Still, that film felt like it was all mixed up in all the other problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time. The obsession with the multiverse. The messy, feckless, rudderless ship that the MCU became after Endgame. In that chaos, a few bright lights shone, but they were still mired in post-Endgame fog. Perhaps Brand New Day really is just that, a turning point for Marvel and the MCU. And perhaps that's wildly optimistic, and I'm just still buzzing from what was a really fun, if a little clunky at times, movie. So Peter Parker had Doctor Strange wipe the entire world's memory of him from existence. Not of Spider-Man, but of Peter Parker himself, because that was the only way to stop the universe from unraveling in the mess of a multiverse apocalypse that Peter had unwittingly created. The physics of it all are a little murky now, half a decade on, but the point is this: Peter Parker had to save the world, and in order to do so, he had to wipe himself from the memories of everyone, friend or foe alike. Not quite like dying to save the world. At least when you die, your memory lives on. Or you get recast as Doctor Doom. Now, 4 years later in the story, Peter remains a solitary hero, working closely with the friendly neighborhood NYPD detective Jean DeWolf, Liza Colanzais. He's famous and successful and lonely. He misses Ned, Jacob Batalon, MJ, the friends he made in the Avengers and his old life, but he carries on as the martyr, helping bring bad guys like Scorpion, Michael Mondo, to justice. He doesn't seem interested in making new friends or dating or doing single stuff like random trivia or karaoke nights. His life is a little depressing, to be honest, but he's pushing all that down until he finds himself following Ned to a party. He follows him on social media, so he's always up to date on his and MJ's lives, but this time he actually follows him to their place where he mingles and discovers that MJ has a boyfriend. This sends him into a mental spiral, a decline that has some very real consequences involving his powers that I won't get into here. Suffice to say, we all hit puberty at different times. On top of all of this, there's a new threat in town, a threat that the Department of Damage Control wants stopped. This rather obviously shady government department is led by Bill Metzger, played by Trammell Tillman, who we all know from Severance. So we know immediately that something is up with this guy, though I just kept waiting for some defiant jazz. One thing leads to another and Spider-Man finds himself hunting and being hunted by this new threat, often bumping shoulders with the Punisher. They make a great odd couple. Peter so sweet and sincere, Frank so grouchy and vulgar, that at one point, just as he utters the word mother, he's cut off from finishing the curse by a well-placed web. And Peter keeps bumping into his old pals, too. He visits Bruce Banner, who's retired from hulking and is teaching physics to college kids who only really take his class because he's the Hulk. But through it all, Peter is trying to come to grips with this new life mostly by denying his own feelings and clamping down the changes that are happening in his life. It's just that age-old story. You can't really run away from your problems. You can't ever really hide from yourself. The movie works because it's a good story that moves along at a great clip and throws in plenty of action and humor to balance out its more somber themes. Plenty of web slinging, plenty of antics, plenty of things going boom. Holland is perfect as Peter Parker, and the various familiar faces he comes into contact with are all fun, especially Yelena Belova, Florence Pugh, and her amazing office. Yes, the plot can feel a tiny bit convoluted at times, but it's nowhere near as confusing as Brave New World, and by the end, it all comes together nicely even if many threads are left dangling. It also avoids one of the biggest pet peeves I have with these movies, the world is going to end, and the superhero has to save it trope. There's probably a better name for that. But the world-ending stakes almost always take me right out of a movie, because we know that one of two things is going to happen. Either the world will end, and thus the franchise will be over, or the heroes will save the world. Rarely, very rarely, does this involve heroes dying in the process. Smaller, more intimate stakes are what get me invested in these stories, because more personal stakes are more relatable and create more tension and thus, despite being smaller in terms of scale, are actually much bigger in terms of narrative oomph. I felt nothing watching the Fantastic Four. Nothing, Lebowski. No fear that the world would end. No fear that any of the characters would die trying to save it. Just nothing at all. I enjoyed Thunderbolts right up until it became this goofy plot to save the world from this new shadow power. Superman might have been fun if our hero had had to choose between saving Lois Lane or saving the city or something, anything, beyond just the world is going to end because of space pockets going haywire. These stories are dull because they're all basically the same. Brand New Day did something different. It wasn't some revolutionary story, by any means, but it kept things personal from start to finish, and there's some fun, if somewhat predictable, twists to keep it from devolving into mustache-twirling supervillain territory. In other words, this is a fun movie that avoids most of the pitfalls the MCU has fallen into in recent years, dull stories and characters, an addiction to the multiverse, lame final confrontations, etc. And lets us just enjoy these characters and this world for a couple hours. The audience clapped in my theater, and this was a showing that got interrupted halfway in by a power outage. Impromptu intermission. So, the bad guy of the movie is Jean Grey, the X-Men character now played by Sadie Sink of Stranger Things. Of course, she's not really a bad guy at all, she's just a powerful psychic trying to find her sister who was abducted by Damage Control and Mr. Milchick, Bill Metzger. She's young and angry and arrogant and powerful and uses whatever tricks she has at her disposal to get into Damage Control HQ and try to rescue her sister, and this involves manipulating Peter. She can essentially possess people within 33 feet of her and hop from person to person. If you saw the 1998 Denzel Washington movie, Fallen, you'll get a sense of how this works, only Jean Grey is not a demon. So at one point, she possesses MJ, and while she and a masked Peter stand on a rooftop, she pulls up his mask and says that maybe something will spark her memory. And they kiss, and she says Peter. He starts to cry because he's so relieved that through the power of love, she's remembered who he is. Only it's not MJ at all. It's just Jean Grey possessing her, and she mocks him for it afterward. She taunts him for thinking the power of true love's kiss would restore MJ's memory. It's a sad moment, and it becomes bittersweet when they actually talk about it later. He tells her that he loves her, and she says she doesn't even know him. She thinks he's a great guy, but to her he's just a stranger. But when he takes her home, she invites him up to meet Ned, fully masked, and they all hang out. Ned is thrilled because he's been trying, and failing, to solve the mystery of who this masked superhero is. He's even put together a spy day tracker app, that is featured in the post-credits scene. What MJ notices during their time spent joking around is that they do, in fact, seem like best friends. Even though Ned has no idea that he ever knew Spider-Man, they joke and laugh the way only old friends do. And I think this, and how it ties into the very end of the movie, is really what sold me on this film. Because no, the power of true love's kiss doesn't work, doesn't spark that memory for MJ, doesn't rekindle her love for him. But at the very end of the movie, after the dust settles, Peter spots Ned sitting at a cafe and walks over and greets him. He introduces himself as Peter, the name Ned heard MJ refer to Spider-Man as. And then Peter goes to shake his hand, and they do their special handshake, and they do it exactly the way they always did. There's this dawning look of realization that comes over Ned's face as Peter smiles back at him. "Oh, Peter," he exclaims. And the credits roll. There were audible gasps from the audience. It was one of those perfect emotionally poignant endings to a film that made everything that came before it work better, click together just so. Honestly, I think it was one of the best single moments in the entire MCU run. It also sort of reminded me of Hook, when the Lost Boys are all picking sides over whether Robin Williams's character, a middle-aged all-grown-up Peter Pan who doesn't even remember that he's Peter Pan, is, in fact, the Pan. Most of the kids go over to Rufio's side, because Rufio is the leader now and he doesn't for a second believe that this oil-dripping beef, fart-sniffing bubble butt could be Peter Pan. All grown UPS are pirates as far as Rufio is concerned. And then one little boy walks across the line in the sand and walks around him, looking him up and down. And he holds Peter's middle-aged face in his hands, takes his spectacles from his face, feels the lines on his face and grabs his cheeks, squeezing them back into a smile. And then he says, "Oh, there you are, Peter." Well, I love that movie, Hook, and I always will, and that scene always gives me chills and makes me teary-eyed. And maybe it's just Peter Parker and Peter Pan sharing a name, but it was that same moment in Brand New Day in a lot of ways. Ned realizing, as they finished that elaborate secret handshake, and not just realizing in the way you know something is a fact, but recognizing that a thing is true, and in so doing, breaking the spell. It's not the girl, not the kiss, not the thing Peter's been mooning over all these years, it's the friendship. That older, deeper bond, not the flighty, hot burning passion of love and attraction, but an old stone, rooted deep, that even strange sorceries can't erase. And I could tell that the audience felt that moment as strongly as I did. It crackled in the air. To dip our toes back into the Odyssey, it's similar to Telemachu's realizing the old beggar is his father. That loyal dog, holding out all these years for his master to return. That deep loyalty no curse, not even the gods themselves, can shake. Spider-Man, Brand New Day is an exciting, emotionally powerful, often hilarious action-adventure movie that breathes new life into the superhero genre. Whether it's a flash in the pan or the start of something better for the MCU remains to be seen, but you should go see it on the biggest and best screen you can find. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Let me know your thoughts on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Be sure to check out my YouTube channel as well, where I'll have a review up for this film soon also, and while you're at it feel free to subscribe to my Substack. Peter Parker and Spider-Man are made to suffer. His suffering is what makes him unique among superheroes. Batman is traumatized, but he's still a billionaire who never needs to worry about where his next meal comes from. Peter has to be a regular guy navigating the responsibility of being a superhero, but his last 3 mainline outings in the Marvel Cinematic Universe gave him the safety net of a support network including friends, family, and Earth's mightiest heroes. However, at the climax of his previous movie, Spider-Man: No Way Home, Peter had to make a big sacrifice, which leaves him totally alone with no one knowing his true identity. Spider-Man: Brand New Day, rather than try to speed past this obstacle, embraces it and uses it to make the first Tom Holland Spider-Man movie that leans into the character's angst. The wide-eyed teenager is fully behind us, and in Destin Daniel Cretton's sequel, the monster of loneliness is what lies ahead. It makes Brand New Day a darker picture, but a necessary one for the character's evolution. Peter Parker, Holland, lives a lonely existence. I'm not sure what he does for money, but he lives in an attic apartment where he divides his time between fighting crime as Spider-Man and wishing he could be at MIT with love of his life MJ, Zendaya, and best pal Ned, Jacob Batalon, who, along with the rest of the world, don't remember he exists because of the spell Doctor Strange cast at the end of the last movie to save the world. A new threat emerges in the city from a mysterious figure who can possess any person other than Peter. In addition to battling this mystery enemy, Peter is undergoing a physical transformation that's giving him new abilities but also fueling his rage. The film's closest MCU cousin isn't the previous Spider-Man movies, but last year's Thunderbolts*, a superhero film that leans into a trauma plot about people who feel discarded and isolated. I quite liked Thunderbolts*, and while some may feel like the trauma plot is a bit overdone, it depends on the character, and certainly Spider-Man is no stranger to trauma. Cretton's opening montage for the character lets us see how Peter's alter ego has also become his hiding place, where he feels reminded of his mission and in some semblance of control. The pain comes when he has to be Peter, alone in the world and watching his friends live their best lives without him in it. This feels particularly acute in a world where, despite digital connections, there's a growing sense of isolation, not only from a post-COVID world, but the general sense of how growing up means losing your friends. Peter is looking at his best pals through his phone, Ned's on Instagram, and Brand New Day understands that the character's heart has to rest atop those relationships. It's certainly fun to throw in other MCU characters, but the film uses the earned capital of the last 3 Spidey movies to give serious weight to Peter's longing for MJ and Ned. And as we also all know all too well, the lonelier someone becomes, the angrier they can get. The story uses Peter's physical transformation to emphasize his rage, a smart way to emulate plot beats from the comic's symbiote costume storyline without having to carry all of its narrative baggage, but then brings in similarly rageful characters like Frank Castle / The Punisher, Jon Bernthal, and Hulk, Mark Ruffalo. The mystery figure is also driven by rage, and their ability to hop between bodies is a neat way to symbolize losing yourself. Spider-Man has become Peter's sole refuge, and if rage eats away at Spider-Man, then what's left? In this crucible, the scenes with Peter, MJ, and Ned feel like coming up for air. However, the movie wisely holds back on giving us too much of them, not only to create a distinction between the previous trilogy but also to allow us to share in Peter's longing. If he was hanging out with Ned and MJ for long stretches, even under the guise of Spider-Man, then the loneliness and yearning for their friendship would diffuse the emotional tension. Part of being Spider-Man is not getting what you want, and when the film withholds scenes with Ned and MJ, it doesn't feel like it's just for more superhero stuff, but to emphasize the distance between Peter and his old life. The emotional heft balances nicely against the superhero heroics, and thankfully the movie is never so deadly serious that it forgets to have a sense of humor. The dynamic between Spidey and Punisher is particularly nice, not only because Frank's isolation highlights a dark road that Peter could vanish down if he's not careful, but also due to the big brother/little brother energy Holland and Bernthal have in their chemistry. The script is also not so wedded to its themes that it forgets to have fun, so if Spider-Man needs to fight some ninjas, he's going to fight some ninjas. I was trying to figure out why Spider-Man is the king of superhero movies. How does he have no rival? How does he rise above a genre that everyone with a mature movie IQ knows is heading the way of the Western? It took me one long afternoon sitting up amongst the La Cienega oil rigs to figure it out. But I finally did. I'll share what I realized later. In the meantime, there are so many other interesting things to talk about. Spider-Man, Brand New Day might as well be called Spider-Man, screenwriting topic smorgasbord. If you haven't seen the film, here's a spoiler-filled rundown. Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, is consumed with his work. Remember, nobody remembers who he is anymore, including MJ, Zendaya, and Ned. So he's thrown himself into his work. That's made his life very singular. Spider-Man is going it alone. But then Spidey's spider mutation starts amping up. His senses become overloaded, making it hard for him to do his job. So he goes to the one guy who knows the most about keeping your senses in check, Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. Bruce helps him come up with an inhibitor device that keeps his more aggressive spider mutations quiet. But no sooner has he figured that problem out than he encounters a strange new villain that can hop between bodies. This signifies the goal, G in GSU, for our hero in the story, and it doesn't come until 45 pages into the script. Normally, in a screenplay, you want this coming between pages 12 and 20. But Spider-Man can get away with this because he's the most likable superhero ever. So don't think you can start pulling this crap in your own screenplays. After a side quest where Spider-Man finally reveals to MJ that he's Peter Parker and they had a whole past together, a side quest the writers only barely connect to the main plot, it's revealed that our big main villain is, in fact, Jean Grey. Don't know who that is? Well, if you saw Spider-Man this weekend, you would have been alerted to the fact that that's a very big deal by the resounding "oh" you heard from everyone around you. Jean Grey is a major player in the X-Men. So finally, our full plot has emerged. And we're now a good 100 pages into the script. We gotta stop Jean Grey and whatever she's up to. Well, apparently, she was trying to free her sister from an evil corporation. Instead, though, she gets caught by that organization. And when she takes control of it from within, it'll be up to Spider-Man and the Punisher, forgot to tell you, he's in the film too, to take Jean Grey out. Or, help her realize that she's wrong so she can have a massive character arc and turn into a good guy. I'm not going to share which of those two possibilities happens, it's the second. The reason I went deeper on today's plot summary is because I find it fascinating that these gigantic studio properties can do things in screenwriting that the average Joe screenwriter isn't allowed anywhere near. We don't reveal the goal, until 45 minutes into the film. We don't reveal the bad guy, until 100 minutes into the film. It's crazy. You can't even dream of doing that in a spec script. And you really shouldn't be doing it in a studio comic book movie either, because it creates problems. The number one problem is, this movie is designed to arc Jean Grey. They're trying to make a complex villain here. And they're trying to do it after us not meeting the villain until 100 minutes into the movie. Which means you have to really scrunch together this arc. I actually think they pulled it off by the skin of their teeth. It was just believable enough that it worked. But could it have been better? Without question. There was so much in this movie that didn't need to be here. You didn't need MJ and Ned. That was all subplotty stuff. You didn't need the Punisher. He did not need to be in this movie. You didn't even really need Hulk. If you would have stripped all of that out, we could have met Jean Grey at a traditional midpoint, 55 to 60 minutes into the film, and really focused on her storyline and helped us get to know her better, so that we would have really been on board with her arc at the end. Cause there's this really nice late story scene where Peter Parker and Jean Grey are in his mind, back in his old apartment, talking about the similar issues they're going through in life. And it's really the culmination of both their arcs. It works surprisingly well. But if this movie didn't have all these ridiculous unnecessary distractions, it could have been iconic. Cause it would have been culminating the only thing the story was about. I think when people look back at this movie, it's hard to figure out what it's about because so much stuff was in there. But the truth is, this is how professional screenwriting works. You don't get to write what you want. Tom Holland comes to you and says, I want the Punisher to be in this movie because he's my favorite comic book character. And I want my wife in this movie. And even though she's pointless, I want to give her some scenes that actually matter. Now it's your job to figure out how to do all that, even though it's turning your screenplay into a bloated mess. But I will say this. Spider-Man movies are a clear cut above the other comic book movies out there outside of maybe Batman. And I believe the people involved in this franchise genuinely feel a responsibility to the fans. Which is something that's rare in this business. A lot of people involved in big franchises say they care about the fans. But the truth is, they don't. They care about money. Which is why so many bad Marvel movies have been made this decade. They were not thinking about the fans. With this movie though, the first thing you see is Tom Holland thanking you for coming to the theater and telling you how much he knows this character means to people and how he takes that responsibility very seriously. And you can tell it's not lip service. I get the sense that Tom Holland can't sleep at night until he knows that he's done everything in his power to make his latest Spider-Man movie as good as it can possibly be. Even if you don't like this movie, and I would understand that, by the way. As a screenwriting enthusiast, this script is problematic for the reasons I brought up above. I don't think you can argue that anybody who was a part of this movie didn't care. I believe they did everything they could to make this movie work. Even Bruce Banner. You don't need the Hulk in this movie. So when you see him in the trailers, your first thought is, studio trying to get more money. But when you watch the film, you realize that they didn't pick him arbitrarily. He went through such a similar thing as Peter Parker is going through now, that it makes sense that he be the superhero that Peter goes to for help. Getting back to my original question, why is Spider-Man a cut above all these other superhero wannabes who less and less people are showing up to see? It actually took me seeing Supergirl a month ago to be able to compare the two in a way that gave me the answer. Spider-Man is the purest example of a character with superpowers being placed in an ordinary world. He's someone with spider powers operating in New York City. Simple and to the point. That is the foundation for why superheroes work. Contrast. The contrast between their extraordinariness and the world's ordinariness. The second you fuck with that contrast, the whole superhero formula starts falling apart. Supergirl had several problems. But at the heart of its issues was an extraordinary person being placed in extraordinary environments, space, alien planets, etc. No contrast at all. I'm not saying it's impossible to make extraordinary on extraordinary work. But it's a lot harder. Because the contrast is the biggest bang for your buck element that makes superheroes work. Get rid of it, and you have to be perfect with all the other elements to make up for it. I will die on this hill that the multiverse was the worst thing that could have possibly happened to superhero movies because it created an endless string of extraordinary on extraordinary films. Back to Spider-Man. Consider the fact that, for the first time in I can't remember how long, we got a superhero movie where our superhero looked like he was walking through real environments. I guess Thunderbolts did that too, but that movie had issues for other reasons. But seriously. Psychologically, it makes a difference when I feel like we're in a real place. These stupid ass studios have lost the plot with green screen on top of green screen on top of AI. We're not looking at anything on the screen that's real, and they put their heads in the sand on this stuff. They still think it's okay to do, but between Obsession and Odyssey and now this, maybe they'll wake up. We'll see. They better. Because this movie may be bigger than Doomsday. Which would be nuts. One simple superhero being bigger than all the superheroes. Spider-Man, Brand New Day was a good movie. And it did about as good of a job as a studio movie can do creating a character-focused film. For that reason, I definitely think it's worth checking out in theaters. I know there are passionate superfans out there who will disagree with me, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been a shell of its former self since the blockbuster event that was 2019's Avengers: Endgame. A total of 14 movies and 20 streaming series have released since Endgame. A couple were nice surprises and a few others were serviceable. But some were glaring disappointments. Even more, none have managed to build up anticipation quite like the MCU did in its heyday. But one bankable exception has been Spider-Man. Collectively, the three standalone Spider-Man movies have made a whopping $3.94 billion at the global box office. Tom Holland has proven himself to be perfect for the role of Peter Parker, and his three solo films have mostly been solid. Yet none of them stand among the best of the MCU offerings. Well, not only does the latest entry, Spider-Man: Brand New Day, offer a welcomed refresh for the beloved web-slinger, it's also the very best Spy-Day movie of the Tom Holland era. Destin Daniel Cretton takes the directing reins from John Watts, and you can quickly tell the difference in his approach. Brand New Day has much of the same superhero energy and playfulness as its predecessors. But it stands out as the most emotionally grounded of the now four standalone Spy-Day films. Even more, its story offers a much-needed evolution for the Peter Parker character, exploring themes of loneliness and isolation, while portraying the sacrifice that so often defines true heroism. For those in need of a quick refresher, in 2021's No Way Home, Peter Parker, Holland, makes the choice to have himself erased from everyone's memory in order to save the multiverse. He makes a pledge to his girlfriend MJ, Zendaya, and best friend Ned, Jacob Batalon, to find them and reintroduce himself when the time is right. And that leads to the events of Brand New Day. As a means of dealing with his loneliness, Peter fully occupies himself with his crime-fighting duties as Spider-Man. About his only means of human connection is with New York City Police Detective Jean DeWolf, Liza Colanzais. Otherwise he has spent what would have been his exciting college years at MIT watching MJ and Ned from afar. Both now live much different lives without any knowledge of Peter. Meanwhile he waits, heartbroken yet determined, for the right time to reveal himself and the truth of their pasts together. Peter's personal journey eventually converges with his role of Spider-Man after the appearance of a mysterious antagonist who is able to telepathically hop from person to person, possessing whoever they embody. The telepath targets the Department of Damage Control, which prompts its director, Bill Metzger, Trammell Tillman, to reach out the Spider-Man for help. But the telepath isn't so easily deterred and will stop at nothing to reach the secret which lies inside of the DODC's vault. Danced around a lot of information, and for good reason. Co-writers Chris McKenna and Eric Summers pack a ton into their story, much of which is better discovered for yourself. What impresses most is their ability to balance the more intimate personal stakes with the explosive superhero action. While there are plenty of moments for laughs, the film has a more serious tone which allows us to emotionally connect on a surprisingly deeper level, more so than with any of the previous Spidey films. But then there is the action, which features some of the best captured, cut, and choreographed set pieces from the MCU to date. Smartly, Cretton ensures the characters remain his focal point. This is Holland's best Peter Parker performance to date, while Zendaya and Batalon offer their best supporting work of the series. Beyond them, we get a wild array of side characters and guest appearances, highlighted by Jon Bernthal's killer return as Frank Castle aka the Punisher. While slightly tamed to fit the film's PG-13 rating, Bernthal still retains Castle's fury and grit. Mark Ruffalo also returns as Bruce Banner in a role that doesn't feel necessary, yet that finally gives us a glimpse at the real Hulk that so many of us have been longing for. The vast majority of the movie comes together incredibly well, but there are a few minor issues. There are a couple of appearances that feel thrown in for reasons beyond this story. There's a storyline involving Peter's sudden spider mutations that leads to several good scenes but no real conclusion. And there are several instances of things just not making sense. For example, how do some memories click for one character but not for another? It's a case of the movie opening doors and not always knowing how to close them. I went into Brand New Day interested in it more than excited for it. Then for the first time in years, I left the theater feeling genuine enthusiasm for an MCU movie. Destin Daniel Cretton has rediscovered what makes these movies click, by shedding most of the multiverse baggage and telling a contained story that nicely balances authentic humanity with pulse-pounding superhero thrills. Brand New Day may not be the best ever MCU offering, but it definitely sits in the upper tier. And when you've put out 38 movies, that's a pretty impressive accomplishment. This film, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, written by Chris McKenna, based on Spider-Man, produced by Kevin Feige, starring Tom Holland, cinematography Brett Pollack, edited by Nat Sanders, music by Michael Giacchino, production companies Columbia Pictures, distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. Release dates July 27, 2026. Running time 145 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $225 million. Box office $1.216 billion.